Funding for the Shakespeare plays has been provided by grants from Exxon Corporation, Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and Morgan Guarantee Trust Company of New York.
Who were the first humans? In the scorching Ethiopian desert, archaeologist Donald Johansen is about to unearth an answer that will stun the world.
Oh, it's just too much. It's so exciting. I mean, God.
The answer is in the bones of 13 individuals quickly nicknamed the First Family.
Right here.
In the same desert just the year before, Johansen and his crew had uncovered the skeleton of the earliest known human ancestor, a 3.5 million year old female called Lucy.
Looks incredible.
To learn more about these major events charting the course of human evolution and about the controversy surrounding them, discover Lucy and the First Family, next on Odyssey.
Be watching Tuesday at 9.
As big as modern day man.
This program is made possible by grants from the Office of Special Education, Department of Education, and from the Dow Chemical Company.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight, with Max Robinson at the National Desk in Chicago, Peter Jennings in Cairo, a special assignment report, the Underground Railroad escaped from Iran, and from our desk in Washington, Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. The United States moved forward today with plans to support its friends in the Arab world, mainly Egypt and the Sudan, and to caution its enemy, Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. We have a full report tonight, and we begin with Peter Jennings in Cairo. Peter?
Frank, the United States is intensifying its military presence in the Arab world. Just 6 days after President Sadat was murdered, the United States is moving closer to becoming involved in the conflict between Egypt's neighbors, Sudan and Libya. From the Sudanese capital of Khartoum, ABC's James Walker explains how.
The United States' view that Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi poses an imminent threat to Egypt and the Sudan brought these top-level American officials to Khartoum today. The purpose of their trip, to provide U.S. military supplies on a crash basis, and most significantly, to send American military training advisors here. State Department Counselor Robert McFarland said the men and equipment, including armor, artillery, and aircraft, could start arriving in Sudan before the end of the year, a departure from U.S. policy in this part of the world.
I don't mean to mislead. When you speak of advisors, that carries a connotation that we may not intend. The training that we will provide, yes, would accompany the delivery of the equipment this year.
Would American military advisors be working in the field with the Sudanese soldiers?
We would work at the sites established for training, and those will be decided by the Sudanese authorities. We're talking about a training mode, and we think that serves both countries' interests.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is there a possibility that American advisors would come in direct contact with Libyan soldiers?
We don't foresee that.
ABC News has learned that the United States has given Sudan assurances that it will not allow the country to be defeated in a military conflict with Libya. What is not clear yet is how far Washington is prepared to go.
What is known, though, is that Libya's Gaddafi has been almost unopposed in his subversion and military actions against other African countries. Last year, Libya virtually annexed Chad, a country with strategically important borders on Egypt and Sudan. Intelligence sources say in the past few weeks, Libyan troops have increased from 5 to 15,000, and that they are massing on the Chad-Sudan border. In addition, the Sudanese government claims Libya has brought into Chad in great numbers highly sophisticated tanks and planes, all supplied by the Soviet Union. And for the past several weeks, Libyan fighters have been bombing Sudanese border villages. This buildup is looked on by American officials as a direct threat, not just to the Sudan, but also to America's major ally in this region, Egypt. James Walker, ABC News, Khartoum.
This is Sam Donaldson. President Reagan, returning to the White House today from Camp David, reaffirmed U.S. determination to stop Libyan aggression, but through supplying arms to others, not through any direct U.S. military involvement.
I can assure you that we have no intention of any Americans just engaging in combat.
What about the speed up in arms deliveries to Egypt and the Sudan?
I think that that's called for, yes.
Are we going to make certain that Gaddafi does not invade the Sudan and take over the Sudan?
Egypt and the Sudan have a treaty with regard to that. And Egypt has made it plain that they're going to stand by that treaty. And I think if you compare Libya to Egypt, that should restrain the big Gaddafi.
Drawing a line in the sand?
Well, maybe along that border there of the Sudan, maybe they have.
In order to hold that line around the Sudan, the administration intends to begin the immediate supply of an arms package, together with U.S. training personnel, which includes F-5 fighter bomber aircraft, M-60 battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, light artillery, and red-eye anti-aircraft missiles. This equipment would be reprogrammed from shipments currently being assembled for other destinations so that it could go immediately. The cost would be approximately $100 million. Financing arms in a situation involving Libya's Colonel Gaddafi has one controversial aspect to it that the president was asked about today.
Sir, if Colonel Gaddafi is such a bad man, why don't we stop buying his oil and financing his activities?
Well, someone else would buy the oil and finance his activities, and so we wouldn't be gaining anything there.
Why not just cut him off?
We might be cutting off our own nose despite our face.
Last year, American oil companies paid Colonel Gaddafi almost $8 billion for his oil. Now the American government is dispatching some $100 million worth of equipment to stop his aggression. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, the White House.
From the Soviet Union today, a warning the United States should keep its hands off Egypt. The Soviets said their security was affected by American moves in the region since Sadat was shot. It was a message similar in tone to that when the Shah was overthrown in Iran. Here in Cairo today, Egyptians went back to work. The religious festival they'd been celebrating is over. President Sadat has been buried. The Hosni Mubarak presidency is about to begin. While the rest of the Arab world and Israel watches to see what sort of a man he is, Egyptians keep an eye cocked for further violence. Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
Egyptians today began to get a fuller picture of last week's assassination. The man who was sitting next to Sadat, Defense Minister Abu Ghazala, revealed today all three of the accomplices are alive. Earlier reports said one had been killed. And that the assassination squad's wounded leader, a Lieutenant Islamboli, emerged this morning from a coma in his well-guarded hospital to say he did it because he felt Sadat was not governing Egypt in an Islamic way. Ghazala reported that he pushed Sadat down before the president was hit. Then, he said, he saw the face of the assassin. He was pointing at me. He pulled the trigger, emptied his magazine at Sadat. Ghazala confirmed searches are underway for an undisclosed number of other fanatics in possible connection with the assassination. Tonight, Egyptian television showed photographs of 5 men, saying only they are wanted by authorities and that anyone helping them in any way will be severely punished. One of the 5 is Aboud el-Zomar, a colonel in Egypt's army intelligence who was already wanted even before the assassination for an unsuccessful plot to kill Sadat 2 weeks ago. Hidden sharpshooters have been positioned around the Cairo home of Interior Minister Nabawi Ismail. It is reported to have been fired on from speeding cars yesterday, killing some guards. Ismail is in charge of tomorrow's referendum vote and was in charge of arresting 1,500 dissidents when Sadat cracked down on them last month. And in the southern city of Asyut, troops have now been ordered to shoot on sight in any outbreaks, such as the one there immediately following Sadat's death last week, in which 58 were killed after Islamic extremists took over the police headquarters, to be routed only after 30 hours of fighting. Anwar Sadat's campaign against Muslim extremists, which may have gotten him killed, is being carried on by his successors. The Egyptian army today announced it has now dismissed 18 officers whose offense is simply having what it calls fanatic religious tendencies. No suspicion of their being connected with any plot. Bill Blakemore, ABC News, in Cairo.
From Syria today, the first word from President Assad himself on the death of Anwar Sadat. Assad said of the man who was once his brother in arms, "I've thought for a long time the Camp David agreements would collapse. Now I'm more sure than ever." President Nixon continues his private tour of the region. He leaves Saudi Arabia tomorrow for Jordan, where he'll see King Hussein. Max?
Well, still ahead, President Carter's back in Washington and speaks out on both the PLO and the AWACS deal. We'll have that story, as well as a special assignment report on some desperate efforts to buy a one-way ticket out of Iran. And Stephen Gear takes us on a hunting trip in search of a beast that hasn't been seen in over 800 years.
Former Presidents Carter and Ford are being criticized in Israel for their statements that eventually the United States will have to talk with the PLO. They made their comments during the flight back from Cairo, and though neither man suggested negotiating with the PLO until after it recognizes Israel's right to exist, Israeli officials said their statements can only encourage the PLO in its struggle against peace. President Reagan today reiterated the long-standing position of this country on the PLO, recognition of Israel first, then possibly negotiations. Mr. Carter flew here again today and indicated he is not surprised at the Israeli reaction. We have a report from Susan King.
No impressive Air Force jet for the Carters' first extended visit to Washington. After 9 months of almost total silence and absence from the Washington scene, President and Mrs. Carter arrived back in the Capitol for a series of mostly private events. President Carter was quick to reiterate his strong statements on the need to involve the PLO in the Middle East peace process.
There's no way ever to have permanent peace in the Middle East without a solution to the Palestinian issue. As soon as the PLO or the Palestinian leaders are ready to recognize Israel's right to exist in peace, in my judgment, at that time we ought to start negotiating with them.
This was a relaxed Mr. Carter who seemed to enjoy answering questions. There was an edge of criticism for the Reagan administration, whose Middle East efforts, he said, have involved only low-level officials.
I would like to see the administration play a very strong and aggressive role with the Secretary of State or with some high-level designee present to keep the talks moving forward more aggressively.
But on the AWACS issue, Mr. Carter is on the Reagan team. Today he sent letters to Democratic Senators Sam Nunn and Robert Byrd, urging them to support selling AWACS to, quote, our valuable friend Saudi Arabia. President Carter is staying here at Jackson Place, diagonally across from the White House, in a residence provided for former presidents. From here, he can selectively decide to be the supporter or the critic. Mr. Carter hinted that when he meets with President Reagan tomorrow on the budget, he'll be the critic. Susan King, ABC News, Washington.
One other note, it is now considered likely that President Reagan's special Middle East envoy, Philip Habib, will return to the region next month in an effort to strengthen and perhaps expand the ceasefire in Lebanon between Israel and the PLO. Peter?
One final note from here in Cairo, some observations by a senior Egyptian advisor to Presidents Sadat and Nasser. The United States, he said, must now be cautious in its relations with Egypt. Anything which even seems like big and little brother will bring no joy to either. Secretary Haig's tone this weekend struck many Egyptian officials as smacking of trusteeship. President Sadat said this advisor had listened too much to the Americans. President Mubarak, he urged, must listen more to the Egyptians. The new president is seen by many officials here to have two present challenges in foreign affairs. One is to break the Arab alliance, which was so anti-Sadat, but not necessarily anti-Egypt. The other is not to sign a bad Palestinian autonomy agreement with Israel. It's never a surprise here in Cairo to hear Egyptians say that only the United States can lean on Israel. for the moment at least, one influential Egyptian is saying, don't lean too hard on Egypt, no matter how hard you're trying to help. In other news overseas, Amnesty International said today it knew of 1,800 people executed in Iran during the last 3.5 months. That is 600 people more than those known executed in the entire world last year. It comes as no surprise that more and more people are trying to flee Iran. There are a variety of ways, and ABC's Mark Litke has been on special assignment along Iran's border with Pakistan.
It takes a 22-hour drive across barren Baluchistan to reach the village of Taftan, once just a simple border outpost for trade and travel between Iran and Pakistan. But with Iran's transformation into a virtual concentration camp, Taftan has become a haven for smugglers and refugees. In the middle of the desert, we found stockpiles of consumer goods, all the trade banned by Iran's Islamic fundamentalists, with an army of mercenaries standing by, ready to smuggle it all across the border for a piece of the action. But even more lucrative now is the thriving business in human cargo. Iranians fleeing for their lives or livelihood as conditions at home deteriorate, willing to pay up to $3,000 a person to skirt official checkpoints and the Revolutionary Guards. Like 23-year-old Amir, his only crime was once working for a foreign company. But in Iran these days, that's tantamount to being a spy.
Yes. Already they came to our house and they were trying to capture me once.
So, fearing his days were numbered, Amir fled from Tehran to Zahedan, where he spent 2 weeks finding a trustworthy guide to lead him across the mountains into Pakistan. Then through Taftan, to Quetta, to Karachi. Just one route in an underground railroad that has helped hundreds of Iranians flee in recent weeks. This is the area where many of the illegal border crossings take place, a rugged mountain pass just north of the border town of Taftan, a sort of no man's land between Iran over there and Pakistan here, an area usually ignored by authorities on both sides of the border. Tough Baluchi tribesmen control this territory, owing allegiance to neither country. They smuggle people for the money. With Russian motorcycles and Japanese pickup trucks, they carry their customers to secluded ravines, where they switch from Iranian to Pakistani licensed vehicles. It's more risky now, they say. These three have already had one shootout with Iranian guards, so the price has gone up. I see. At a safe house in Taftan, the next stop, an Iranian still afraid of being identified admitted it was dangerous and expensive, but it works.
To come out from Iran, it's nothing to come out. But these Baluch, you know, when we speak to them, it depends like how much money they want. They're demanding how much money. They look at the party. If the party looks poor, they take less money. If he looks rich enough, they take big money.
The owner of this Iranian passport paid $200 to Pakistani officials for this stamp.
This is money paid under the table to Pakistan.
No, on the table. And the police, he says this is less. On the table, he says give some more. Sometimes they bargain. They say, this is less money, give some more.
A payoff was all he needed to pass through Pakistan. First by overground rail, right into Karachi. Then just blending in until an airline ticket can be purchased to the nearest friendly country. For this businessman, his wife and daughter, the harrowing journey is over in the safety of a Karachi hotel room. It cost him $20,000 to bring a woman and child along. He was lucky. He could afford it. Those who can't pay, he says, have no hope.
As I said, they're condemned to stay and suffer. Or if they don't like it, they're going to be executed. There is no way to criticize the situation in Iran. You criticize and you're gone. That's it.
The Iranians we met do not believe publicity will derail future escape attempts. Iran's borders are just too vast to patrol, they say, and the Underground Railroad too well fueled by fear on the inside and greed on the outside. Mark Lipke, ABC News, Karachi, Pakistan.
Two former First Ladies, though not the present one, spoke out again today in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. The setting was majestic, the words defiant, and the message optimistic. We have a report from Joe Benton.
E-R-A, E-R-A, let us go together like equal pay.
Only 1,000 ERA advocates showed up at the Lincoln Memorial to help the National Organization for Women begin the final drive to ratify the amendment. Now had expected 4,000. Betty Ford, the honorary chairman of the Countdown campaign, urged the crowd to get tough in the 9 months left before the ratification deadline.
We are at the point of demanding recognition.
And Lady Bird Johnson compared the ERA fight to the civil rights battles of the 60s.
The fight for civil rights was won because it was the right thing to do. The Equal Rights Amendment is the right thing to do.
In all, 35 states have approved the amendment, but it is still 3 states short of becoming part of the Constitution. Now intends to concentrate ratification efforts in 5 states: North Carolina, Florida, Illinois, Missouri, and Arkansas. Now plans to pour all of its resources into the ratification battle, but it is an uphill fight. And even if the amendment were ratified, it would face a series of court challenges before becoming law. Joe Benton, ABC News, Washington.
Medical news has word today of a major breakthrough which could open a whole new world to 750,000 blind Americans. Ray Nunn has details.
They look like science fiction eyeglasses that might give vision to the many who are legally blind. But these strange glasses with telescopic lenses are anything but fiction. 17-year-old Raymond Bacco is legally blind and a freshman in college. With the aid of the glasses, his vision is increased from 10% to 95% of normal. To him, that's a miracle.
The whole world is much more detailed than it was before. I can see stuff that I didn't even know existed before.
The design idea, 3 tiny telescopic lenses for each eye, is based on the eye of the honeybee, compound eyes with many lenses in all directions. The lenses provide not only magnification, they enable the wearer to expand his field of vision without moving his head. The glasses have been successfully tested on 62 of 74 patients. These glasses can't help those who are totally blind or those who have only shadowy vision. But for the 1.5 million Americans classified as legally blind, these glasses, which cost between $3,000 and $6,000 a pair, are a ray of hope. Ray Nunn, ABC News.
A final medical note, a simple new blood test may soon enable doctors to spot and eventually treat cases of severe depression. A test developed by researchers at the University of Chicago pinpoints how well a person's blood can absorb a particular chemical, serotonin, which has been linked with some forms of serious depression. Finally tonight, a search for truth and knowledge on a university campus in the far reaches of northern Michigan, but it's more a quest than a search, and the prey is not exactly of this world. Stephen Gear explains.
Each year, for 11 years, when the leaves turn red and gold on the campus of Lake Superior State College at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, the hunting of unicorns gets underway. That's right, unicorns. This is not a unicorn. It's Professor Peter Thomas, Oxford-trained, a poet, and co-founder of the Quest.
Questing the unicorn is a very private and intimate and solitary affair.
Well, yes, Professor, sometimes.
U-N-I-C-O-R-N! U-N-I-C-O-R-N! Unicorn!
Spelling unicorn is easy. Finding unicorns is not so easy. These fraternity brothers are setting out on the hunt, or quest as some call it, since killing the mythical beast is out of the question. The unicorn is an endangered species. None has been captured for at least 800 years. These students are demonstrating 2 styles of questing, group and solitary. It's not difficult to spot the solitary quester, something in the eye or the arm. But how does one actually capture the unicorn?
The medieval Book of Beasts says it is wild, it is pure, which is why if you want to catch a unicorn, you must first find a virgin.
You know what the only legal bait is?
What is it?
Virgins. 23,000 unicorn questing licenses have been issued over the years at 50 cents apiece. But oddly, they don't reveal how you'll know when you've found your unicorn.
He looks like different things to different people.
We drank to that thought at the home of the co-founder of the Quest, Bill Raby.
I think some of our best sightings take place late at night after the bars close.
Long into the night, we sought the unicorn. After a full day of unicorn hunting, We've come to the conclusion that the unicorn, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. Each of us has his own vision of the beast. Stephen Gear, ABC News, in the unicorn hunting country of northern Michigan.
Thank you, Steve. Once again, tonight's top story. The United States is speeding up the shipment of military equipment to Egypt and the Sudan, and although Americans will go to the Sudan to act as advisors, President Reagan insists they will not be sent into combat against Libya. That's our report for now on World News Tonight. This is Frank Reynolds. For ABC News, good night from Washington.
The Caption Center thanks the American Broadcasting Company for making World News Tonight available. This program was made possible by grants from the Division of Educational Services, Office of Special Education, Department of Education, and from the Dow Chemical Company.
A state grows through the efforts of its people. Nebraska has a rich heritage. All those